Elara Vance lived in a house that leaned a little, just like a tired old man resting after a long day's walk. The house stood on the edge of the Widow's Creek, a slow, muddy ribbon of water that snaked through the cypress knees. Every day, the sun rose, and every day, Elara began her work. Her ritual was as fixed as the moon's pull on the tides. She dusted the mahogany table, wiped the fine china, and set out 2 places. 2 plates, always 2. Silas had been gone for 3 long years, swallowed by the Widow's Creek during a sudden, mean squall, but Elara never ate alone. The community whispered it was madness, the kind of sorrow that twists a mind like a rope, but Elara paid no mind. She knew what she knew. The air in that second chair, the one with the cracked spindle, was never quite empty. It hummed. It held a density that the rest of the humid air did not. She only wished that the whispers outside the kitchen window would stop, letting her hear the quiet better. For in the quiet, she could almost hear his low laugh coming from the empty seat. Silas had been a man built for the woods and the river, quick to smile and even quicker to disappear on long fishing trips. The night he vanished, the rain beat down like 100 drummers, angry and loud. Elara remembered the scent of pine sap and river mud on his heavy boots, the way his hand felt, rough and warm, when he tucked a loose strand of her hair behind her ear. He had told her, "Don't worry, Elara, I'll be back before the first star shines." But the stars never came that night, only the thunder and the dark. His small boat was found the next morning, tipped over near the great cypress, but Silas was gone. The water remembers. Mama Joe, the town elder, had told her. But sometimes what the water remembers, it holds close, like a miser holding his gold. Elara had cleaned the mud from his coat, which the rescue team had brought back, and hung it in the wardrobe. It still smelled faintly of Silas, a scent that only seemed to grow stronger when she was near the kitchen table. Mama Joe, a woman whose face was etched with every sorrow the county had ever known, tried to talk sense into Elara once a month. "Child, you gotta let the river have its due," she'd plead, standing at the warped screen door, refusing to step inside the gloom. Elara would just smile, a thin, papery smile that didn't reach her eyes. "He'll be home when the lamp wick burns low, Mama Joe. He likes the lamp low." Elara would turn back to polishing the silverware. Silas had a specific way he liked his napkin folded into a sharp, crisp triangle, and Elara executed this detail with military precision. This quiet defiance was the only true conflict in Elara's life now. She wasn't fighting the ghost or the memory. She was fighting the world that insisted Silas was just a handful of silt at the bottom of the Widow's Creek. She had heard a sound just last week, a soft scraping, like a chair being nudged slightly. The first night after the search was called off was the worst. The house was too big, too still. Every shadow seemed to stretch and shift, turning into Silas's silhouette just out of sight. Elara sat at the table alone, but the food on the second plate felt wrong. A mockery. She almost scraped both plates into the compost bucket. But then, a distinct feeling washed over her. A cold, heavy pressure on her shoulder. The exact spot where Silas used to rest his hand when he was thinking hard. It wasn't a malicious cold, but a deep, sorrowful chill. A silent plea. She stopped, spoon halfway to the garbage. She looked at the perfectly set plate. The butter knife angled just so, the small, mismatched glass he always preferred, and she saw or felt a deep, consuming hunger radiating from the space across from her. It was a spiritual hunger, a need for the shape of life, for the routine that anchors the soul. That night, she ate both portions, one after the other, ensuring that the second plate was wiped clean. 2 plates, always 2, and 2 clean plates at the end of the meal. It happened near dawn a few weeks later. Elara had slept poorly, her mind buzzing with the weight of the humid air. She walked into the kitchen, intending to break the ritual, to leave the second chair empty and the second place unset. Her hand was reaching for the single, chipped breakfast plate she used when she was truly alone. Her mind made up. "Stop this foolishness," she thought fiercely. But the moment she touched her own plate, the delicate china serving spoon on Silas's side of the table rattled. It wasn't a violent shake. It was a gentle, insistent vibration, as if someone had lightly tapped the table's underside with a fingertip. Elara froze. It was a clear, physical sound, not just a draft or a creaking beam. It was a sign. The message was unmistakable. Keep going. She dropped her own plate, which luckily didn't shatter, and instead grabbed Silas's favorite, the one with the faded blue border. The river kept its secret, but the table was Elara's truth. The moment she settled the second plate down, the spoon grew still. The table setting was Elara's language of devotion. She did not speak of Silas's ghost, but she spoke to it with every deliberate action. The bread had to be sliced thin, exactly the way he liked it for dipping in soup. The coffee cup was his special chipped porcelain, never the clean ceramic. The fork next to the empty seat was always the silver one, the heaviest and oldest, a family heirloom that gleamed faintly in the low kitchen light. Sometimes, she would arrange the crumbs left over from her toast in a particular pattern, and when she returned hours later, the pattern would be subtly changed, redistributed into something resembling a single, long letter, though she could never quite make out which one. This small detail, this rearrangement of tiny bits of matter, was enough to quiet the fear that sometimes tried to bubble up in her throat. 2 plates, always 2. Leo, Elara's young nephew, was the only one in the family brave enough to visit the Leaning House. He was 18, full of city sense, and he came armed with logic and worry. "Aunt Elara, please, let me pack up his things," he pleaded, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked at the perfect, untouched place setting and shuddered. "It's unsettling. It's not good for you." The conflict in the room was palpable, a silent war between Leo's tangible, modern grief and Elara's spiritual certainty. Elara simply pointed at the empty chair. "Sit, dear. Silas will be along for tea soon." She spoke of Silas as if he were only delayed by traffic on the main road, not sunk in the muddy depths. Leo sat, stiff and uncomfortable, forcing himself to look straight at the empty space. As he sipped his tea, the air around the empty chair grew noticeably colder, a sharp, metallic chill that felt like breathing in winter rain. Leo didn't need to see a ghost to know the chair was occupied. He felt the unseen presence pressing against the back of the wood. Leo watched the kitchen's stillness with growing dread. His eyes darted from his aunt, calmly buttering a roll, to the empty chair. He swore he saw the shadow of a hand, darker than any natural shadow, rest on the back of the seat, gripping the spindle for just a second. When he blinked, it was gone, leaving only the humid air and the low hum. He tried to rationalize it. Fatigue, the heat, the power of suggestion, but the icy spot on his spine refused to thaw. "Aunt Elara?" he began, his voice a tight whisper. Do you ever hear him?" He searched her face for a sign of true madness, for the crack in the facade. Elara looked up, her blue eyes clear and perfectly sane, but filled with a sorrow so vast it felt ancient. "Hear him? No, dear. Hearing is too loud. It's more like a tuning fork," she explained, setting down her butter knife. "It's a feeling in the teeth, a pressure behind the eyes. It's a knowledge that isn't yours, but his." The river kept its secret, but Silas was sharing it, bit by bit, through Elara. Elara leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if the ghost himself might overhear. "He doesn't talk in words, Leo. He talks in need." She confessed that some days, the presence was frantic, demanding buttered rice or a sweet cup of chicory coffee, things Silas had loved. Other days, the presence was heavy and still, requiring only silence and the sight of the perfectly folded napkin. She admitted that she felt a growing weakness, a slow draining, especially after the sun set. I think the routine, the food, it's not for him, not entirely," Elara whispered, the confession hanging heavy in the air. "It's for the thing that came back with him, the thing that didn't like the river's silence and needed a home." This was the true, terrifying shift. Elara was no longer feeding her husband's memory. She was appeasing something else entirely. 2 plates, always 2, but one of them was for a much older, darker hunger.
From seasons past, the path is over to in the space where you should be. 3 years and the river's calm, but in me it runs still. I talk to the evening where I know you are. Stillness, hope, quiet.
Silas had always been restless, but before the river took him, his restlessness had turned into a low-grade fear. He'd started staying out late, meeting men with hard eyes near the old docks. He'd come home smelling not of river mud, but of cheap whiskey and something sharp and metallic, like old pennies. Elara recalled an argument weeks before he vanished, fierce and quick, about a debt he owed a man named Thorn. "It's not money, Elara. Something owed. Something I took that wasn't mine to take," Silas had yelled before slamming the door. The next day he was gone, rowing into the squall. Elara realized now that the frantic hunger she sometimes felt across the table matched the panic in Silas's eyes that day. Silas had run to the river to escape a physical debt, but the river, in its ancient wisdom, had exchanged that debt for a spiritual one, a lien on his very return. The first physical evidence of the ghost's interaction came on a Tuesday. Elara had prepared a thick gumbo, Silas's favorite, ladling a generous, steaming portion onto the second plate. She left the kitchen for less than 5 minutes to fetch a bottle of hot sauce from the pantry. When she returned, the gumbo on the second plate was no longer steaming. Furthermore, a single smooth indentation, like the gentle impression of a thumb in thick mud, marked the center of the gumbo. The thick roux had been disturbed, flattened slightly, and the surface had cooled in an instant. Elara slowly moved her own bowl and leaned closer, sniffing the air above the second plate. It smelled faintly of nothing, a chilling absence of scent, like the smell of a winter stone. The change was tiny, almost negligible, but it was confirmation. The act of setting the table was not an act of therapy, but an act of service. Something was consuming the essence of the meal. The river kept its secret, and that secret had an appetite. Elara's increasing frailty became another form of conflict. Her skin grew thin, almost translucent, and she moved with the slow, deliberate grace of someone saving their energy for the barest necessities. She realized the cost of the ritual wasn't just the food and the time. It was a siphon on her own life force. When she prepared the meals, she felt robust, energized by the purpose. But when the phantom presence settled down, she felt the life drain out of her, leaving her weary and cold, even in the deep summer heat. The more lavish the meal, the greater the toll. Sometimes, when she placed the fork on the table, she felt a strong tug, pulling her hand toward the empty chair, a silent command to stay and offer more than just dinner. This was the price of Silas's. The physical world, symbolized by the bank, tried to break Elara's peace. A letter arrived, official and cold, threatening foreclosure on the leaning house. Silas had mortgaged the property shortly before he disappeared, a detail he had kept secret. Elara was forced to confront the world she had long ignored. She sat at the dining table, the letter spread next to Silas's perfect plate, and she felt the presence next to her solidify with distress. The air grew ice cold. The ink on the letter seemed to darken and blur slightly. "You must tell me where it is, Silas," she murmured to the emptiness. "Where did you hide the payment?" A moment of intense focus, and then, a faint, almost imperceptible scratching sound came from the floorboards directly beneath the table's empty chair. Elara understood. The distress of the phantom was focused on the place beneath him, the secret place of his physical life. The pressure from the bank forced Elara out of her housebound routine. She had to take the small ferry across the river to the county seat, leaving the empty chair and the untouched table behind for the first time in years. As the boat chugged across the murky water, Elara looked down, and the river seemed unnaturally clear for a moment. She saw swirling colors that weren't reflections, dark purples and greens, like the bruise of a great depth. She felt the current, usually so sluggish, pull at the boat with a frantic urgency, trying to drag it back toward her house. The river was calling her, not to return Silas, but to return to his secret. The moment she stepped off the ferry, the vision vanished, and the river returned to its placid, indifferent brown. She realized the river was not just the keeper of Silas's secret, but his eternal prison, and the table was the only window out of it. Later that afternoon, after fending off the bank lawyer with a check drawn from an old, forgotten account, Elara went straight back to the house. Following the hint from the morning, she carefully pried up the floorboard beneath the empty chair. Tucked into the hollow was not money, but a leather-bound journal. It was Silas's handwriting, scrawled and erratic. Most of it was illegible nonsense, but one entry, dated the week he vanished, was hauntingly clear. I made a pact with the river's keeper. What I lost, I gained. What I gained, I must feed. The cost is the bridge back. Elara sat back on her heels, the dusty journal shaking in her hands. The keeper, not a debt collector, not a person, but something ancient living in the deep mud. Silas hadn't run from a debt. He had made a trade for a temporary benefit, and the thing he gained, the keeper, was now sitting at her table. 2 plates, always 2. But the ritual was designed not to bring Silas back, but to keep the keeper fed and settled. The terrible truth of the journal hit Elara with the weight of a waterlogged log. The presence across from her was not the residual spirit of Silas. It was the keeper, an ancient, sorrowful entity that Silas had made a desperate bargain with. Silas's body was gone, but his routine, his place in the world, had been occupied by the thing he had owed. The ghost Elara loved was not Silas, but the price of his final mistake. She looked at the chair, and the icy cold radiating from it seemed to burn her skin. The suspense was no longer in waiting for Silas, but in waiting for the keeper to reveal its true form and final demand. Elara felt a strange calm settle over her. She realized she had to break the pact, not by stopping the ritual, but by completing it, by offering a final, perfect meal that satisfied the keeper enough to leave. The river kept its secret, but Elara was finally ready to expose it. That evening, Elara began preparing the most complex, lavish meal she had ever attempted. It was a feast designed not out of love, but out of necessity and sacrifice. She made a thick crab boil, a blackberry cobbler dusted with rare sugar, and she uncorked the dark, sweet port wine Silas had been saving for their 10th anniversary. Every movement was deliberate, sharp, and final. She moved with a clarity she hadn't possessed in years, the weakness in her limbs forgotten. She was preparing a ransom. As she worked, the tension in the kitchen became almost unbearable. The sound of the boiling water seemed to hiss a name that wasn't Silas. When she finally set the meal down, the second plate gleamed under the low light, the food arranged in a perfect, opulent mound. 2 plates, always 2, and this was the last meal. Leo arrived unexpectedly, having forgotten his hat during his earlier visit. He walked into the dining room just as Elara was sitting down. He saw the feast, and then he saw it. A shadow, solid and deep, that sat in Silas's chair. It wasn't transparent. It was the deepest shade of midnight, a form woven from pure absence and sorrow. The air around the shadow shimmered like heat rising off asphalt. Yet the temperature in the room dropped sharply, making Leo's breath plume. He couldn't scream. The sight stole the air from his lungs. The shadow across the table was not Silas's shape, but a primal, hunched form, ancient and starved. Elara looked at the shadow calmly, almost pityingly. She nodded at the keeper as if greeting a relative. Leo finally found his voice, a raw, strangled sound. "Aunt Elara, what is that?" he begged, clutching the door frame. Elara ignored Leo, keeping her eyes fixed on the empty but occupied chair. "I know who you are," she stated, her voice steady and clear. "You are the keeper. You are the price he paid to escape the man named Thorn, and the price he paid for the false promise of freedom." She slid the full, perfect plate toward the shadow. "You kept him safe from the world, and in exchange you claimed his routine, his seat, and his memory." The keeper's shadow seemed to pulse, growing slightly larger, taller, consuming the light around it. The fork on the second plate vibrated furiously, a high-pitched metallic whine filling the silence. Elara had to confront the keeper before it could fully devour her life, as it had slowly devoured the essence of Silas. She had to speak its name, the unspoken bargain. The river kept its secret, but Elara was giving it a voice. The shadow remained silent, but its presence pressed against Elara's mind, a wave of cold, desolate hunger. Elara knew the food was only a temporary appeasement. The keeper wanted the bridge back mentioned in Silas's journal. The bridge back, Elara whispered, finally understanding the true cost. Elara closed her eyes and, with the finality of a judge's gavel, made her payment. She didn't offer her life. She offered the memory. She focused on the purest, strongest memory she held. Silas, laughing in the sunlight, his face clear, before the fear and the debt had corrupted him. She pushed the image, the scent of his cologne, the warmth of his hand, out of her mind and toward the shadow. As she did this, she felt an excruciating psychic tear, like a root being violently ripped from the earth. The memory vanished, replaced by a hollow blankness. The moment the memory left her, the keeper's shadow surged forward, not in anger, but in satisfaction. The shadow accepted the payment, the essence of the pure memory. The moment the memory was taken, the keeper's shadow began to shrink, its dark material dissolving like smoke caught in a strong breeze. The chilling air rushed out of the room, replaced by the normal, thick, humid air of the Mississippi night. The intense, deafening silence lifted, and the ordinary sounds of the house, the creak of the floorboards, the buzzing of a fly returned. The shadow was gone. The only things left were the untouched, opulent feast and the heavy silver fork, which had clattered onto the polished wooden floor. Leo rushed to his aunt, who sat perfectly still, her face pale but her eyes finally, truly empty of sorrow. She was free, but the cost had been absolute. 2 plates, always 2, but now the second one was merely a plate. Elara did not sleep that night. She watched the dark outside her window turn slowly to gray. The house felt lighter, cleaner, less burdened. She finally swept up the broken pieces of the chair spindle that had shattered when the keeper left. As the first rays of sunlight pierced the dusty kitchen window, Elara walked to the table. For the first time in 3 long years, she reached for a single plate, her own chipped, humble breakfast plate. She set only one place, 1 cup, 1 napkin, 1 knife. The empty seat across from her was just wood and air, warm with the morning sun, no longer humming with a consuming presence. The memory of Silas's laugh was gone, but so was the crippling need for his shadow. A final, thin layer of mist lifted from the surface of the widow's creek outside her window. The river kept its secret, but Elara had finally sealed the door to the house. Peace was not a return, but a quiet, singular beginning.